The coffee shop on Pine Street was always busy during lunch hour. People rushed in and out, grabbing their drinks and heading back to work. But Jake noticed her right away. She sat in the corner table by the window, completely focused on a thick book. Her dark hair fell across her face as she read, and she had a pencil in her hand writing notes in the margins. Jake ordered his usual black coffee and found himself looking her way again. She wasn't just reading the book, she was having a conversation with it. Writing little thoughts, drawing tiny pictures, underlining sentences. It was like watching someone solve a puzzle. He grabbed a seat 2 tables away, pretending to check his phone while stealing glances. The book looked old and worn, like it had been read many times before. When she turned a page, he caught sight of the title, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Heavy stuff for a Tuesday afternoon. Jake worked as a graphic designer for a small advertising company downtown. His life followed the same pattern every day. Wake up, coffee, work, gym, Netflix, sleep. Repeat. He wasn't unhappy, but he wasn't exactly thrilled either. Just existing in that comfortable middle space where nothing bad happened, but nothing great happened either. But sitting there, watching this woman read like her life depended on it. Something stirred in his chest. Curiosity, maybe, or just the desire to break his routine. She looked up suddenly, catching him staring. Instead of looking away, embarrassed, she smiled slightly and went back to her book. That smile gave him courage. Jake walked over to her table, his heart beating, faster than it should for such a simple thing. "Sorry to bother you," he said, "but I couldn't help noticing that book. Is it any good?" She looked up again, this time studying his face. "That depends," she said. "Do you like books that make you question everything you thought you knew about life?" Her voice had a slight rasp to it, like she'd been talking all morning, or maybe she was a smoker. Jake found it oddly attractive. "Honestly, I mostly read design, blogs and the news, but you make it sound interesting." She closed the book carefully, using a napkin as a bookmark. "It's about lightness and weight, how some people go through life barely leaving a mark, while others carry everything heavily. The author thinks lightness might be unbearable because it means nothing we do really matters." Jake sat down without being invited. Normally, he would never do something so bold. "And what do you think? Is lightness unbearable?" She considered this seriously, tracing patterns on the table with her finger. "I used to think weight was better. That suffering and struggle gave life meaning. But lately, I'm wondering if maybe lightness isn't about meaninglessness. Maybe it's about freedom." This wasn't the kind of conversation Jake usually had. His friends talked about sports, work, gossip, weekend plans. Simple stuff. But talking to her felt like diving into deep water after spending years in the shallow. "And I'm Jake, by the way. Lisa," she said, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm, confident. "And you look like someone who's been living pretty lightly yourself." Jake laughed, surprised by her directness. "Is that a polite way of saying I look boring?" "Not boring. Safe. Like you've figured out how to get through life without too many bumps or bruises." She was right, and it stung a little. After his last relationship ended 2 years ago, Jake had built his life around avoiding complications. Work was steady but not challenging. His apartment was comfortable but not exciting. His social life existed but didn't push any boundaries. "What about you?" he asked. "Are you carrying things heavily or lightly these days?" Lisa's expression shifted slightly. For a moment, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "I'm learning to put some things down," she said. "It's harder than you'd think." Jake sensed there was a story behind those words, but he didn't push. Instead, they talked about other things. She told him she'd just moved to the city 3 months ago. She was a photographer, though she was working part-time at a bookstore to pay the bills. She loved old movies, especially the ones that were too weird for most people to understand. Jake found himself talking more than usual, too. He told her about his job, how he'd started out thinking he'd be designing movie posters or album covers, but ended up making ads for insurance companies. He talked about his tiny apartment and how he'd been meaning to decorate it properly for 2 years, but never got around to it. Maybe you're waiting for the right inspiration, Lisa suggested. Maybe I'm just lazy, Jake replied. Or maybe you're waiting for your life to feel worth decorating for. Her words hit him unexpectedly hard. It was exactly how he felt, though he'd never put it into words before. Like he was waiting for real life to begin before he started really living. They sat there for almost 2 hours, long past the lunch rush. The coffee shop had emptied out, leaving just a few people with laptops and books. Jake realized he should have been back at work an hour ago, but he didn't care. When Lisa finally gathered her things to leave, Jake felt a small panic. This conversation was the most interesting thing that had happened to him in months. "Would you maybe want to get dinner sometime?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Lisa paused, her book halfway into her bag. "I'm not really dating right now," she said. "I'm still figuring some things out." Jake's heart sank, but before he could respond, she continued, "But I wouldn't mind continuing this conversation. Maybe we could be friends who talk about heavy books and light living?" Jake smiled, surprised by how much better that felt than a typical dinner date. "I'd like that." She wrote her number on a page torn from her notebook. As she handed it to him, their fingers touched briefly. It was nothing dramatic, but Jake felt something shift, like a door opening in a room he'd kept locked for too long. 3 weeks passed before Jake worked up the courage to call Lisa. He'd stared at her number dozens of times, typed messages he never sent, and made up excuses for why he shouldn't reach out. What if she'd forgotten him? What if she was just being polite that day? Finally, on a rainy Thursday evening, he called. She answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said, and Jake could hear the smile in her voice. "I was starting to think you'd lost my number." "I kept it safe," Jake replied. "I was just trying to think of something interesting to say. How about we start with hello and see where it goes?" They talked for an hour that first night. Lisa told him about the bookstore where she worked, how she spent her breaks reading in the back room and organizing the photography section that nobody else cared about. Jake shared stories about his weird coworkers and the ridiculous ads he had to design. It became a routine. Every few days one of them would call. Sometimes they'd talk for 20 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. Jake found himself looking forward to these conversations more than anything else in his week. A month after their first meeting, Lisa suggested they meet up again. Not for dinner, she made clear, but for a walk through the old part of town where she'd been taking photographs. Jake met her on a Saturday afternoon near the abandoned railway bridge. She had her camera with her, an old film camera that looked like it had been around since the 70s. "Digital is easier," she explained as they started walking. "But film makes you think before you shoot. You can't just take 100 photos and hope one turns out good." They wandered through empty lots and past buildings with broken windows. Lisa would stop suddenly, crouch down, and take a picture of something Jake would never have noticed. A flower growing through a crack in concrete, shadows falling across a rusted door, graffiti that looked more like art than vandalism. "What do you see in all this?" Jake asked after she'd spent 5 minutes photographing an old brick wall. "Stories," Lisa said simply. "Every broken thing has a story. Every abandoned place was important to someone once. I like capturing that moment between what was and what will be." Jake watched her work, fascinated by her focus. She moved through the world, differently than he did. While he hurried from place to place, always thinking about the next thing, Lisa paid attention to the present moment. As they walked, she started opening up about her life. She'd been married for 5 years to a man who wanted her to be someone she wasn't. Someone quieter, more predictable, less interested in wandering around photographing broken buildings. "He wasn't a bad person," she said as they sat on a bench near the river. "He just wanted a different kind of wife than I could be. Someone who cared about dinner parties and keeping the house perfect and talking about safe topics." "What happened?" Jake asked. "I realized I was disappearing. Bit by bit I was becoming this person I didn't recognize. So I left, packed my camera and my books and drove here without really knowing why." Jake felt something shift inside him as she talked. He recognized the feeling of disappearing, though his version was different. Instead of changing for someone else, he'd just stopped changing at all. Stopped growing, stopped taking risks, stopped being curious about what life might offer. Their friendship deepened over the following weeks. They explored different parts of the city together. Lisa showed Jake how to see beauty in unexpected places, while Jake helped her navigate practical things like finding a better apartment and dealing with bureaucracy. Jake found himself changing without realizing it. He started noticing details he'd missed before. The way light fell across his apartment in the morning, the expressions on people's faces during his commute. He even began taking some risks at work, suggesting creative ideas instead of just doing exactly what was asked. Lisa was changing too, but in a different direction. She was becoming more solid, more present. The restless energy she'd had when they first met was settling into something calmer, but no less vibrant. 2 months into their friendship, Lisa's landlord told her the building was being sold. She had 30 days to find a new place. In a city where rents kept rising and good apartments disappeared within hours of being listed, 30 days wasn't much time. Jake found himself making an offer before he could think too hard about it. "I have a spare room," he said during one of their phone conversations. "It's not much, but it's cheap and it's available." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Jake started to panic. Had he overstepped? Were they not close enough friends for this kind of arrangement? "Are you sure?" Lisa asked finally. Living together changes things between people, even friends. Jake wasn't sure of anything really, but the thought of Lisa having to leave the city because she couldn't find affordable housing felt wrong. "We'll figure it out," he said. "We're both reasonable adults." Lisa moved in on a Tuesday afternoon in October. She didn't have much stuff. Just her photography equipment, boxes of books, some clothes, and a few pieces of furniture. Jake helped her carry everything up to his second-floor apartment, surprised by how easily her things fit into his space, and they established rules right away. Split the rent and utilities evenly. Take turns buying groceries, keep common areas clean, respect each other's privacy and space. "This is just temporary," Lisa said as she arranged her books on the shelf Jake had cleared for her, "until I find my own place." "Of course," Jake agreed, "and just temporary." Living together was easier than either of them had expected, at least at first. They fell into a comfortable routine. Jake would make coffee in the morning while Lisa showered. She'd leave him a cup ready when he got up. Evenings, they'd often end up on the couch, Jake working on freelance design projects while Lisa edited photos or read. They were careful with boundaries. Lisa kept her things in her room and the bathroom they shared. Jake made sure to give her space when she needed it. They were like polite roommates who happened to be friends. But after 3 weeks of this arrangement, something began to shift. The apartment felt charged with unspoken tensions. Not bad tensions exactly, but the kind of energy that builds when two people are being very, very careful around each other. Jake started noticing things he'd tried not to notice before. The way Lisa hummed while making breakfast. How she looked when she came home from work, tired but still beautiful in the soft evening light. The sound of her moving around in her room at night, sometimes talking on the phone in a voice too low for him to hear the words. Lisa seemed to be struggling with something too. She'd start to say things and then stop. She'd look at Jake sometimes like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. She began staying out later, taking longer walks with her camera, coming home just before bedtime. The breaking point came on a Friday night in November. Jake had been working late, trying to finish a project for a client who kept changing their mind about everything. Lisa had gone to some photography event downtown. Jake expected her to be out until late, so when she came home at 9:30, he was surprised. "How was the gallery thing?" he asked, looking up from his laptop. Lisa dropped her camera bag by the door and slumped onto the couch beside him. "Pretentious," she said. "Lots of people talking about art like it's some kind of secret code only they understand." Jake saved his work and closed the laptop. "Bad night?" "Frustrating night. I showed some of my urban photography to this gallery owner. He said it was interesting but not commercial enough for his space. Then he spent 20 minutes explaining what kinds of photos actually sell." "I'm sorry. That sucks." Lisa was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands. Jake, can I ask you something? Sure. Are you happy? I mean, really happy with your life? The question caught him off guard. I don't know. I'm not unhappy. Why? I've been watching you these past few weeks. You go to work, you come home, you work on your computer, you go to bed, rinse and repeat. It's like you're sleepwalking through your own life. Jake felt defensive. Not everyone needs drama and excitement to be content. I'm not talking about drama. I'm talking about passion, about caring deeply about something, about taking risks. Like you did? Leaving your marriage? Moving to a new city? Living with someone you barely know? The words came out harsher than Jake intended. Lisa looked like he'd slapped her. Yes, she said quietly. Exactly like that, because the alternative was disappearing completely. They sat in uncomfortable silence. Jake wanted to apologize but wasn't sure what he was apologizing for. Lisa seemed lost in thought, picking at a loose thread on the couch cushion. I think I'm falling for you, Lisa said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake's heart stopped. Or maybe it started beating so hard he couldn't hear anything else. Lisa, I know we said we were just friends. I know this living situation is temporary. I know you're not looking for complications. She was talking faster now, like she had to get all the words out before she lost her nerve. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. Jake stared at her, his mind racing. Part of him wanted to tell her he felt it too, that these weeks of careful boundaries had been torture, that he thought about her more than he should. But another part of him, the part that had kept him safe for 2 years, was screaming warnings. I care about you, he said carefully, but I don't know if I'm ready for. This is complicated. Lisa nodded slowly. I know. I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm just asking you to be honest. With me and with yourself. She stood up and walked toward her room. At the doorway, she turned back. I'm going to take a shower and go to bed, but Jake, we can't keep living like this, pretending we don't feel anything. Something has to change. After she disappeared into the bathroom, Jake sat on the couch staring at the wall. The sound of running water filled the apartment, and Jake found himself imagining things he'd been trying not to imagine for weeks. He knew Lisa was right. Something did have to change. The question was whether he had the courage to let it. Jake didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Lisa move around in her room next door. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of sheets reminded him that she was right there, just a thin wall away, probably, not sleeping either. By morning, the tension in the apartment was thick enough to cut with a knife. They moved around each other carefully, like two people trying not to disturb a sleeping bear. Lisa made coffee but didn't offer him any. Jake grabbed a granola bar and left for work without saying goodbye. All day at the office, Jake couldn't focus. He stared at his computer screen, pretending to work on a logo design, but his mind kept replaying Lisa's words. I think I'm falling for you. The way she'd said it, quiet and brave and terrified all at once. His coworker Danny stopped by his desk around lunchtime. You look like someone ran over your dog. What's going on? Jake considered telling him about Lisa, but how could he explain it? That he was living with a woman he was crazy about but too scared to admit it? That he'd spent 2 years building walls around his heart and now someone was threatening to tear them down? Just tired, Jake said. Maybe you should go home early. You're not getting anything done here anyway. But going home meant facing Lisa, and Jake wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Instead, he stayed late at the office, then went to a bar downtown where he nursed 2 beers and tried to figure out what he was so afraid of. Lisa wasn't going to hurt him. She wasn't like his ex who had made him feel like he was never quite good enough. Lisa saw him clearly and seemed to like what she saw. So why was he running away? By the time Jake got home, it was almost midnight. The apartment was dark except for a small lamp in the living room. He figured Lisa had gone to bed, but as he quietly closed the front door, he heard her voice from the bathroom. Jake, is that you? Yeah, it's me. Sorry I'm so late. Can we talk for a minute? Jake's stomach clenched. Sure. Let me just... But before he could finish the sentence, Lisa appeared in the hallway, and Jake's world stopped. She wasn't wearing any clothes. Not a single thing. She stood there in the dim hallway light, completely open and vulnerable, looking directly into his eyes with the expression he'd never seen before. Not seductive or playful, but serious and determined and a little scared. Jake's mouth went dry. Lisa, what are you... She walked past him into his bedroom and sat down on the edge of his bed. Still looking right at him, still completely bare, still with that serious, determined expression. Do something, she said quietly. It wasn't what Jake expected her to say. There was no flirtation in her voice, no invitation for the physical things his mind immediately jumped to. Instead, her words felt like a challenge, like she was asking him to make a choice about who he wanted to be. Jake stood frozen in his doorway, his heart hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. Every instinct told him to look away, to grab her a robe, to pretend this wasn't happening. But Lisa's eyes held his, steady and unwavering. I don't understand, he managed to say. Yes, you do, Lisa replied. I'm done pretending. I'm done being careful. I'm done tiptoeing around what we both feel because we're scared of getting hurt. Jake realized she was right. This wasn't about physical desire, though he certainly felt that too. This was about emotional courage. Lisa had literally stripped away every barrier between them, and now she was asking him to do the same. I'm scared, Jake admitted, finally stepping into the room. So am I, Lisa said. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life playing it safe. Jake sat down on the bed next to her, careful not to touch her, though every fiber of his being wanted to. What if we mess this up? What if we ruin what we have? What if we don't? What if we actually get it right? For the first time in 2 years, Jake let himself imagine what it might be like to stop protecting himself. To let someone all the way in. To risk being hurt for the chance of being truly happy. I think I'm falling for you too, he said, the words coming out in a rush. I have been for weeks, maybe since that first day in the coffee shop. Lisa's serious expression softened into a small smile. I know. I could tell. You're not as mysterious as you think you are. Then why didn't you say anything sooner? Because I needed you to choose this. Not because I convinced you or pressured you, but because you decided you wanted to stop hiding. Jake looked at her sitting there, completely vulnerable and completely beautiful, not just physically but in every way that mattered. I don't want to hide anymore, he said. Lisa reached over and took his hand. Good, because I'm done hiding too. They stayed up all night talking, not about the future or making promises they might not be able to keep, but about the present, about what they wanted from each other, what they were afraid of, what they hoped for. As the sun started to rise, Lisa finally got dressed and they made breakfast together. Everything felt different now. The careful boundaries were gone, replaced by something honest and real and slightly terrifying. The art gallery was packed with people holding wine glasses and having important-sounding conversations about composition and lighting. Jake stood near the entrance, wearing his only good shirt and feeling slightly out of place among the artsy crowd. But he couldn't stop smiling. The walls were covered with Lisa's photographs, blown up large and professionally framed. The Urban Decay series she'd been working on when they met. The portraits of people she'd encountered on her walks around the city. And in the center of the main wall, a series called Becoming Visible that documented their neighborhood over the past 6 months. Jake recognized some of the locations from their walks together, but seeing them through Lisa's eyes, captured in black and white with such careful attention to light and shadow, made them look completely different. Beautiful, in ways he'd never noticed. She's talented, said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see a well-dressed woman in her 50s studying one of Lisa's photographs. The way she captures emotion in abandoned spaces is remarkable. She sees things differently than most people, Jake agreed. Are you a friend of the artist? Jake smiled. Something like that. Lisa appeared at his elbow, looking radiant in a simple black dress he'd helped her pick out. How are you holding up? She asked. Not too bored by all the art talk? "Are you kidding? I'm proud of you. This is incredible." And it was. 3 photographs had already sold, with red dots placed next to their price tags. Lisa had quit her job at the bookstore the month before to pursue photography full-time. A decision that terrified her but felt absolutely right. Jake had made some changes too. He'd left his advertising job to start freelancing, focusing on projects he actually cared about. The money wasn't as steady, but he woke up every morning excited about his work instead of dreading it. They'd found a new apartment together, a bigger place with good light for Lisa's darkroom and space for Jake's design setup. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to, because they'd chosen each other, completely and honestly. "Remember that night when you asked me to do something?" Jake said quietly so only Lisa could hear. "You mean when I sat on your bed without any clothes on and scared you half to death?" Lisa grinned. "Yeah, I remember. I thought you were asking for something physical, but you were really asking me to be brave." "Were you? Brave, I mean." Jake looked around the gallery at Lisa's work on the walls, at the life they'd built together by choosing vulnerability over safety. "I'm still learning. But yeah, I think I was." A couple approached them, wanting to ask Lisa about one of her photographs. As she launched into an explanation about the story behind the image, Jake stepped back and watched her. She was completely in her element, passionate and articulate and glowing with confidence. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman trying to find herself after leaving a marriage that had nearly erased her. Now she was an artist with her own show, selling her work and talking to strangers about her vision. 6 months ago, Jake had been sleepwalking through life, safe but not really living. Now he was taking risks, creating work he believed in, and loving someone who challenged him to be better every day. It hadn't been easy. They'd had arguments, moments of doubt, nights when they'd both wondered if they were crazy to think this could work. But every time one of them got scared and started to pull back, they remembered that night. Lisa sitting on his bed, asking him to choose courage over comfort. "Do something," she'd said. And finally, after years of playing it safe, Jake had. The gallery owner announced that the show would run for another month, and that Lisa's work would be featured in an upcoming group exhibition. People clapped and Lisa beamed, and Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Pure happiness, not the absence of problems or the temporary pleasure of a good day, but the deep satisfaction of a life being lived fully and honestly. As they walked home that night, Lisa slipped her hand into his. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For doing something. For choosing to be brave with me." Jake squeezed her hand. "Thank you for asking me to." Above them, the city lights twinkled, like possibilities, and for the first time in his adult life, Jake wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, honestly, bravely, and completely visible to each other. The story that had begun with a chance meeting in a coffee shop had become something neither of them could have imagined. Not a perfect love story without problems, but a real one, built on the courage to be vulnerable and the willingness to choose growth over safety. And it was just the beginning.